Hello, I'm Dr. John, and welcome back to Silver Serenity. You might be sabotaging your sugar control and dramatically increasing your dementia risk by eating three specific foods widely promoted as healthy. But don't panic. Understanding these dietary traps is the critical first step toward reclaiming your cognitive and metabolic health. Stick with me, and I will reveal these three metabolic villains and show you the simple, scientifically proven swaps you need to make immediately. Before we proceed to the material, please share your city, age, and the specific health concerns you are currently facing in the comments below. This helps me understand our community better and tailor future content.
The modern era, unfortunately, seems determined to afflict us with chronic diseases of staggering proportion. While type 2 diabetes has long dominated the public health landscape, recognized for its insidious effects on the heart, kidneys, and extremities, a more chilling partnership has come into focus: the strong connection between diabetes and cognitive decline. Studies like the Rotterdam study highlighted a statistically significant elevation in the risk of developing dementia among individuals battling high blood sugar. This wasn't just coincidence. Diabetes appears to actively prime the brain for failure. For seniors navigating metabolic syndrome, managing one chronic condition often means inadvertently managing the risk of neurodegeneration. We are facing a dual epidemic, where the relentless rise of insulin resistance mirrors the creeping advance of conditions like Alzheimer's disease. The physiological mechanisms underpinning this lethal synergy are diverse and brutal. Chronically elevated glucose levels, or hyperglycemia, unleash a cascade of damaging events throughout the vascular system, impacting the minute capillaries that feed the brain's crucial structures. This prolonged metabolic dysfunction led researchers like Suzanne de la Monte to propose the controversial yet compelling idea of type 3 diabetes, positioning Alzheimer's disease as a form of brain-specific insulin resistance and deficiency within the central nervous system. It makes you wonder if our collective obsession with supersized, triple-layered coffee drinks and processed snacks, the things that guarantee an hour of energy followed by a 5-hour existential slump, is really just our species' long, slow, sweet suicide note, faxed directly to the hippocampus. High systolic blood pressure, often co-occurring with type 2 diabetes, acts as a malicious co-conspirator, dramatically amplifying the total dementia risk, making two common conditions exponentially more dangerous together. Insulin is much more than a simple gatekeeper for sugar. In the brain, it plays vital roles in neurotransmission, neuronal growth, and memory formation. When brain cells become resistant to insulin's signals, the hallmark of type 2 diabetes, these essential functions are compromised. Furthermore, diabetes promotes chronic inflammation and oxidative stress, which accelerate the accumulation of harmful amyloid plaques and tau tangles, the pathological hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. These biological stressors combine to create a hostile environment for neurons, decreasing synaptic plasticity. In the present discussion, we recognize that managing diabetes is fundamentally about protecting the brain from this systemic assault. The intimate molecular dance between glucose control and neurological stability demands a highly holistic approach to senior care. For clinicians and caregivers, recognizing this profound connection is paramount. Even mild cognitive impairment in a senior with diabetes is no longer dismissible. It must be viewed as a potentially serious complication of their metabolic disorder. Effective management demands routine cognitive screening, ensuring that therapeutic strategies are adapted for individuals whose ability to follow complex medication regimens might be compromised. The goal is twofold: optimize glycemic control to minimize further neurological damage, and utilize targeted interventions to support existing cognitive function. Understanding this dual epidemic, how diabetes drives dementia, lays the groundwork for the ensuing chapters, where we will explore the precise biological mechanisms, essential screening protocols, and therapeutic pathways designed to shield the aging brain from metabolic catastrophe. The goal is twofold: optimize glycemic control to minimize further neurological damage, and utilize targeted interventions to support existing cognitive function. Understanding this dual epidemic, how diabetes drives dementia, lays the groundwork for the ensuing chapters, where we will explore the precise biological mechanisms, essential screening protocols, and therapeutic pathways designed to shield the aging brain from metabolic catastrophe. We begin by confronting the stark epidemiological reality. Seniors with type 2 diabetes face a substantially higher risk of developing all forms of dementia, particularly Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia. Large-scale population studies, such as the seminal Rotterdam study, confirm this link, often showing that the risk is doubled or even tripled compared to non-diabetic peers. This correlation is not merely a coincidence of aging. It is a causal spiral fueled by shared pathology. The mechanism driving this cognitive decline centers on chronic hyperglycemia, insulin resistance, and systemic inflammation. Excess glucose damages the microvasculature, leading to cerebral small vessel disease, the hallmark of vascular dementia. Furthermore, the brain itself, despite its reputation as a selfish sugar hoarder, becomes profoundly insulin resistant. When the brain cells can no longer properly use insulin for energy, critical functions fail, and the processes that clear toxic proteins, like amyloid beta and tau, the villains of Alzheimer's, become impaired. Some researchers, quite dramatically, have labeled Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes, a metabolic failure specific to the central nervous system. I sometimes wonder if we need to start calling chronic office chair sitting type for diabetes, just to keep the branding consistent. But semantics aside, what we are witnessing is a profound metabolic injury. Critically, the threat to the brain accelerates when diabetes interacts with other common comorbidities of aging. For instance, high systolic blood pressure, often a silent partner to type 2 diabetes, does not just act independently. It synergizes with poor glucose control to exponentially increase the probability of severe cognitive impairment. The combination is catastrophic. Hyperglycemia weakens the vessels, and hypertension delivers the final, destructive blow. This interaction underscores why management cannot be siloed. We cannot treat the sugar and ignore the pressure, or vice versa. The holistic view is paramount for Para pembahasan kali ini. In this discussion, we must recognize that tight blood pressure control is as vital for brain health as maintaining an optimal HbA1c level. Given the heightened and complex risks, screening for cognitive impairment in all older adults with diabetes should be standard practice. Simple, validated tools exist, but far too often, subtle early signs of decline are mistakenly dismissed as normal aging. This complacency is dangerous, as early detection provides the critical window for intervention. Management strategies must then move beyond basic glucose regulation to integrate cognitive support, addressing cardiovascular risk, optimizing sleep, and initiating specialized nutritional guidance. The immediate clinical priority is minimizing macro and microvascular damage, recognizing that the brain is perhaps the most vulnerable microvascular bed of all. The following chapters will detail the specific diagnostic pathways and pharmacological and lifestyle interventions available to mitigate this dual metabolic assault. Picking up from the necessity of mitigating dual assault, we turn our attention directly to the brain, the organ most susceptible to chronic metabolic storm. For the senior population, the risk is not merely theoretical. Large epidemiological studies, such as the Rotterdam study, cemented the reality that type 2 diabetes significantly elevates the lifetime risk of developing dementia, often doubling it. This connection highlights a profound failure of cerebral microvasculature and neuroprotection. When glucose regulation falters systemically, the brain, which demands roughly 20% of the body's glucose supply, becomes structurally compromised, leading to impaired neuronal function long before traditional symptoms of cognitive decline manifest. This metabolic burden shifts the entire landscape of geriatric care, demanding proactive screening rather than reactive diagnosis. The mechanistic link goes far beyond simple sugar poisoning. Chronic hyperglycemia is toxic, certainly, but the primary culprit appears to be central insulin resistance and the failure of insulin signaling pathways crucial. For memory formation and synapse repair, insulin receptors are highly expressed in the hippocampus, and their desensitization contributes directly to the pathologies characteristic of Alzheimer's disease, including hyperphosphorylating of tau and amyloid plaque formation. In this discussion, some researchers have provocatively branded this specific pathology of cerebral insulin resistance as type 3 diabetes. Honestly, given that every new minor variant gets its own Roman numeral these days, perhaps we should reserve type 4 for people who forget where they left their metformin. But the concept emphasizes that the brain is suffering from starvation in the midst of plenty. Crucially, diabetes does not operate in isolation. The increased risk for dementia is dramatically amplified when comorbid conditions, particularly systolic hypertension, are present. High blood pressure and T2D act synergistically to destroy vascular integrity, causing small vessel disease that accelerates both vascular dementia and the neurodegenerative process of Alzheimer's. The cumulative insult of elevated shear stress from high pressure and the inflammatory environment fostered by insulin resistance creates an unstoppable biochemical avalanche targeting cognitive function. It is a vicious cycle where poor glycemic control damages vessels, making hypertension harder to manage, which in turn speeds up memory loss. We are observing not just one disease, but a lethal partnership of metabolic and circulatory failure. For the clinician, managing a patient with both diabetes and emerging cognitive impairment presents a unique and frustrating challenge. Cognitive decline directly impairs a patient's ability to adhere to complex medication regimens, understand dietary restrictions, and perform essential self-monitoring tasks like checking blood glucose. The very disease process that requires meticulous self-management simultaneously erodes the patient's capacity to execute that management plan, demanding a shift toward simplified therapeutic targets and greater reliance on caregiver support. The focus must be on tighter blood pressure control alongside minimizing glycemic variability, recognizing that minimizing chronic microvascular damage is the ultimate protector of the aging mind. This comprehensive view is essential because the medical literature has confirmed a disturbing synergy. Type 2 diabetes T2D significantly elevates the risk for all types of dementia, particularly Alzheimer's disease, AD. This connection is so robust that some endocrinologists provocatively termed AD as type 3 diabetes. While this term initially stirred controversy among purists, it succinctly captures the fundamental pathology. The brain is experiencing its own unique form of insulin resistance. In this discussion, we are focusing on the devastating truth that chronic hyperglycemia and associated metabolic dysfunction starve the very organ responsible for memory and execution. The risk of developing dementia nearly doubles for individuals with T2D compared to the general population, a statistic that demands aggressive preventative intervention long before cognitive decline becomes apparent. The threat is not simply reduced cerebral blood flow. The brain cells themselves lose their ability to properly utilize glucose. The mechanism tying diabetes to dementia is multifaceted, involving systemic inflammation, advanced glycation end products, AGEs, and, critically, neurovascular damage. T2D accelerates atherosclerosis, reducing blood flow to the hippocampus and frontal lobes, the centers of learning and planning. Furthermore, insulin in the brain is not just involved in glucose uptake. It also plays a key role in clearing toxic proteins, specifically beta amyloid and tau. When the brain becomes insulin resistant, this clearance mechanism fails. Chronic, systemic inflammation, the hallmark of poorly controlled diabetes, acts like a slow-burning fire, destroying neurons and synapses. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical companies spend billions inventing exotic, expensive, five-step medication regimens for T2D, seemingly unaware that if the patient is already showing early signs of cognitive impairment, they probably forgot which day they were supposed to take the blue pill, let alone the interaction protocol with the injectable one. This vicious cycle reinforces the need for simplification, not complexity. Landmark studies, such as the Rotterdam study, cemented the statistical link between diabetes and dementia risk. However, subsequent analysis refined this understanding, showing that the danger is massively compounded by concomitant hypertension. Scientific literature demonstrated that the risk for dementia does not merely add up. Rather, it multiplies when type 2 diabetes coexists with high systolic blood pressure. High blood pressure relentlessly damages the delicate small vessels, microvasculature, that nourish the brain. When these vessels are already assaulted by glucose toxicity from diabetes, the destruction is accelerated, leading rapidly to silent infarcts and white matter lesions. It is this combination, the hyperglycemic assault combined with the physical shear stress of high pressure, that constitutes the most direct path toward vascular dementia and exacerbation of Alzheimer's pathology. Therefore, for the patient presenting with T2D, achieving stringent blood pressure targets, often below 138th mmHg, becomes as crucial to brain health as managing their A1C. Given this intertwined risk, the management paradigm for the elderly patient with existing cognitive issues must shift dramatically. The goal changes from achieving rigorous, near-normal A1C levels, which risks severe hypoglycemia, a known trigger for further cognitive decline, to maintaining an A1C safety zone, typically 7.5% to 8.5%. The primary concern is minimizing episodes of hypoglycemia, which can cause immediate and permanent brain injury. Furthermore, recognizing the inherent limits of cognitive impairment, the medication regimen must be pared down to the absolute simplest structure, favoring once-daily dosing where possible. Critical diabetes management tasks, like foot checks, complex medication timing, and glucose monitoring, must transition primarily into the domain of the caregiver. This holistic approach, prioritizing blood pressure and hypoglycemia avoidance over aggressive glycemic control, is the necessary roadmap for preserving function and maximizing the quality of life for the patient caught at the intersection of metabolic and neurological decline. The intersection of metabolic and neurological decline is not accidental. It is pathological. We are dealing with type 2 diabetes' dark twin, a concept some researchers have dubbed type 3 diabetes. This term, while controversial, highlights the brain's profound insulin resistance and deficiency, which directly impairs neuronal signaling and permits the accumulation of amyloid plaques and tau tangles, the classic signatures of Alzheimer's disease. The brain, which consumes a disproportionate amount of the body's glucose and energy, suffers dramatically when its energy supply chain is broken by insulin dysfunction. Crucially, the risk isn't just biochemical, it's aggressively vascular. Studies like the seminal Rotterdam study firmly established that having diabetes significantly elevates the risk of developing all-cause dementia and vascular dementia, specifically setting the stage for cognitive catastrophe years before symptoms are overt. The true danger lies in the synergy between metabolic dysregulation and vascular stress. Janssen's foundational work revealed that the risk for dementia dramatically increases when type 2 diabetes interacts with high systolic blood pressure, SBP. The high-pressure pulse damages the delicate microvasculature of the brain, creating a perfect storm of reduced perfusion and chronic inflammation. Imagine the brain as a highly subsidized government agency. It requires constant, perfect funding, glucose and oxygen delivered smoothly. When that funding arrives erratically and at dangerously high pressure, the infrastructure begins to collapse, leading to confusion and operational meltdown. This relentless damage creates lacuna, infarcts, and microbleeds, intensifying cognitive impairment far beyond what either diabetes or hypertension alone might achieve. The vascular damage is the great accelerator, transforming mild cognitive impairment into rapidly progressing dementia. In this discussion, we must pivot to the critical realization that diabetes management tools themselves become hazardous in the face of cognitive decline. Simple tasks become insurmountable challenges. A person struggling with executive dysfunction cannot be expected to accurately calculate carbohydrate ratios, correctly time complex basal bolus insulin regimens, or reliably perform 7-point glucose monitoring checks. The primary threat shifts violently from chronic hyperglycemia to acute hypoglycemia. Severe hypoglycemic episodes, often triggered by mismatched medication and forgetting to eat, accelerate neuronal death, creating a vicious cycle where poor management leads to further brain damage, which in turn guarantees poorer future management. The goal is no longer achieving an aggressive HbA1c target of 6.5%. That stringent approach is reserved for the newly diagnosed with decades of life ahead. Instead, the appropriate HbA1c target loosens considerably, often rising towards 7.5% or 8.0%. Prioritizing safety above rigorous control, the emphasis shifts entirely to aggressive management of hypertension, keeping that systolic pressure well within bounds, and scrupulous prevention of those dangerous low blood sugar events. This is a profound philosophical shift, acknowledging that tight glycemic control provides no long-term cognitive benefit in this population and poses immediate dangers. The burden of meticulous care inevitably transfers. Critical diabetes management tasks, like foot checks, complex medication timing, and glucose monitoring, must transition primarily into the domain of the caregiver. This holistic approach, prioritizing blood pressure and hypoglycemia avoidance over aggressive glycemic control, is the necessary roadmap for preserving function and maximizing the quality of life for the patient caught at the intersection of metabolic and neurological decline.